So I picked up this lawnmower that I found sitting on the curb with a bunch of other free items. Now I know it's not much to look at, but once we get it running, I think we can still get a fair amount of money for it. Of course, the hard part is trying to fix it, but as you're about to see, this mower's got more than one surprise waiting for us. And it's going to make us have to decide if just being okay is good enough or if we need to do the right thing. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this rather simple looking Yard Machines lawnmower, and the problem is that, well, it's not acting like it should. I know that description is a bit cryptic, but once you see the problem for yourself, it'll make a lot more sense. Now, I'm going to try and repair this lawnmower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. So how exactly is a lawnmower supposed to work then? Well, simple. When it's cold, it should start with 1 or 2 pulls. Then when it's good and hot, you should be able to stop it and then start it right back up again. Now this one is not consistent when doing this, and there could be a couple of reasons why. Now before we go hog wild and tear into this mower, you should at least check the oil first. If the oil level is lower than it should be and it was ran like that for a really long time, it could cause the engine to behave oddly. Now be sure not to read the dipstick right out of the engine. Instead, make sure you wipe it off first and then get your reading. So we've got some great news. First off, the oil is brand new, meaning someone just changed it. Now the oil level is really tough to read because the dipstick is yellow, and with the oil brand new, it's hard to see. Now the other bit of good news is that even though the oil level is on the low side, it's still on the dipstick and is safe to use this way. Next, I want to put some fresh 91 octane 100% gasoline in the tank that's also been stabilized. We'll let it run until it gets warm, and then we'll try restarting it, and hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about. Now the engine is not at full temperature, which won't matter for this test because it only gets worse as it gets hotter. Let's try starting it again and see how it does. So this time it did exactly what it's supposed to do, but on the next start, things go a bit differently. So this time it took a couple of pulls to get it to start, and if I had let it get really hot, it's even worse, sometimes taking a lot more pulls. Now the other reason why this happens is because the valve lash is out of tolerance and it needs to be put back to where it's supposed to be. So is having to pull on the pull rope a couple more times a big deal? Not really, but it depends on the reason why it's doing it. And if the valve lash is out of tolerance, it's only going to get worse until one day you go to pull on the rope and it gets yanked right out of your hand. That's when you know the tolerance is too far out of spec, and that's the reason why the rope didn't want to cooperate. Now there's also a dent in the valve cover that might be interfering with how the rocker arms are supposed to be moving, so we'll need to take a look at it as well. Now, I have the mower tilted on the back wheels for a while because it'll move any extra oil that might be in the valve cover away from it. And doing this will help to keep from making a huge mess when we work on it. I'm also going to keep the front wheels higher than the rear wheels to make sure any extra oil stays away from where we're going to be at. Now, to make turning the engine over by hand a lot easier, I'm also going to take off the recoil and tie down the brake handle. So to get to the rocker arms, we need to take the valve cover off. Just be very careful because they could be stuck to the engine. Now this one was luckily not that way. Also, be aware that if you damage the gasket for the valve cover, it could mean that you'll have to constantly check the oil level in the future, so be very careful. It also doesn't look like the dent that was in the valve cover was as bad as I was thinking, but I still want to make it look better later on. I also don't want to fight the engine when I'm turning it by hand, so I'm going to take out the spark plug as well. And while we're here, I might as well check on the spark plug to make sure it's not a reason for our starting issues. Now, depending upon the brand of engine you have, some want the gap to be set at 25 thousandths while others want theirs to be at 30 thousandths. I like to set mine at 25, but make your choice as to what you want to set yours to. Now, the gap on this spark plug was a little bit smaller than 25 thousandths, which could cause some issues, but I don't think it was related to the one we're having. Also, make sure the spark plug is a quality one, and what I mean by that is that it's not an off-brand. And because this one still has the overspray on it, means this is probably the factory plug, which is what I would always recommend using. Next, I want to rotate the engine so that one of the rocker arms is loose while the other one is tight. After that, we're going to use a 5 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge to see how it fits in the clearance between the rocker arm and the top of the valve. Now, it should slip right in and also not be too loose, but there seems to be an issue with this one. Now, as you can see, it's not wanting to slip in between them, which means the clearance here is smaller than 5 thousandths of an inch, and just to confirm, I'm going to go down one size and try again. And it turns out it too is too big to fit in the clearance, which means it's smaller than 4 thousandths of an inch. Now, I know it doesn't sound like much, but this tolerance being too tight could cause our issues with the hot starts. Next, I want to rotate the engine so that we can check the clearance for the other rocker arm and see if it might be out as well. But this time we get a better result. What you're seeing is the feeler gauge slip in, and there's just enough clearance that it's even moving the rocker arm as I move the shim around. That means the clearance here is right where it needs to be, and we'll only need to make adjustments to the other one. Now, after rotating the engine so that arm is loose, we'll loosen the jam nut in the middle. We'll then slide in the 5 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge into the clearance and start to tighten the adjusting nut. You're going to want to turn it in small increments while moving the shim to make sure it doesn't get stuck. Now, if it does get stuck, turn the nut back the other direction until it's loose again. We want it so the shim just drags in the clearance. Once you have it where you like it, tighten the jam bolt while still holding on to the adjusting nut. Now, you're not done yet. You'll have to go back with the feeler gauge and make sure it didn't change after tightening the bolt. So this one is finally good, which means we can start to put all the pieces back together, but with one tiny exception. The last thing we need to do, since we have the valve cover off the engine, is to try and take that dent out of it. Now, on engines like this one, it's important that you don't damage parts of the engine, and the valve cover is definitely included as well. So if you were using your lawnmower and you were trying to get under your boat or part of your back deck, and after making contact with it, the mower stopped, more than likely the hit was enough to push the valve cover in to make contact with the moving parts that's underneath it. The dent in the cover could then interfere with the rocker arms and cause them to not move like they should and stop the engine. So this repair is not going to win any awards, but that wasn't the point. Instead, it was to make sure it wouldn't get any worse if it gets hit again. Now, if you do damage the gasket for the valve cover, you could get away with using gasket maker or possibly even using some thick cardboard. Now, I have tried using silicone on top of the damaged gasket before, but that didn't work out like I wanted it to. Also, before installing the recoil, I wouldn't mind spraying some lube on the moving parts. Now, if yours is covered in dirt, you might want to clean off that dirt before adding your lubricant. Otherwise, you could make it worse. I'm also going to spray some lube in the area for the spring, but it's not necessary. Also, if you suspect your spring to be rusty or extra dirty and the recoil is not spinning smoothly, you might want to consider spraying some brake cleaner in the area for the spring first to try and get rid of any extra dirt before you add any lube. Now, I will let you know these recoils are not meant to last forever and will eventually break over time, so be ready for when it does happen. I also want to lubricate the wheels and show you part of the cost savings on this mower. Now, to make a mower like this one as cheaply as possible, certain luxuries have been left off of it. So as you can see, after taking the wheel off, there are no height adjusters on it. Instead, to change the mowing deck height, you have to bolt the wheels back to the deck in one of 3 openings. It's not a big deal since most consumers will set their height and never think about it again. And to be honest, if I was using a mower like this one, I would do the same thing, only because changing the height would take time and I may not have that extra time to give. Now, once I've cleaned the wheel bolt and applied a generous amount of lubricant to it, I'll put the wheel right back where I found it. Now, don't be surprised if you find these mowers sitting at the lowest settings possible, as most consumers only want to mow sparingly throughout the year. So most will cut their lawn at a very low setting. That way it'll extend the amount of time they don't have to mow, and you really can't blame them. I'm not going to show it, but I'll do the same process for each wheel. Now, you don't have to take the wheels off to do it, but it does work better that way. The very last item on our list before trying to start this engine is to add our oil to it. Now, just be very careful, as these little engines don't typically take more than 16 to 20 ounces of oil, so try not to overfill it. After adding your oil, you have to check it at least a couple of times just to make sure you're close to full as possible without going over. Now you can be over a little bit, but not by much. What I mean by that is if the level is over the full mark by a fraction of an inch, that's okay. However, if it's over the line by half an inch or more, you'll have to take some of it out. I'm going to leave that process up to you because it can get really messy, so I just tried to avoid it if possible. Now the engine is good and hot, so let's see how it starts back up. So as you can see, it started right back up with no problems, and I was able to keep doing this multiple times without the issue from before. Now maybe the problem it was having was not that big of a deal to you, but to me it was quite annoying, and solving it really wasn't that difficult to do. Now, I'm fairly certain that most would not have seen it as a big problem, but we're all entitled to our opinions even if they're not the same. At least I'll know that when I sell it, it'll be at its best and run the best it can for quite some time. So my question is, do you think I went too far by trying to solve a somewhat erratic hot starting issue, or would you have done the same thing I did? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.